He missed every birthday. Tonight, his son finally calls him what the whole town already whispers: a failure. Nobody in this town knows the truth he's been carrying alone for 5 long years. What he found inside that box would change everything he thought he knew about his father. 5 years of silence. And one card he never found the courage to give until now. The man they called a failure was never the one who betrayed this family. And tonight, the truth finally catches up.
If you have ever sat alone on your birthday watching the door, waiting for someone who never walked through it, then you already know how this story feels before I even say another word. Before we begin, if this story moves you even a little, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be heard by more than just us. Now let me tell you about Daniel Reyes, a man the whole town called a failure, a man his own son once looked in the eye and called worthless, and the one buried secret that would eventually prove every single person in that town, including his own son, completely wrong. Daniel Reyes had missed 9 birthdays in a row, not because he forgot, not because he did not care, but because every single one of those nights he was standing behind the counter of a 24-hour gas station on Route 9, or hauling drywall on a construction site until his hands bled through his gloves, or driving a battered taxi through the rain long after decent men had gone home to their families. He missed them on purpose, in the sense that he chose the money over the moment, again and again, because he believed with his whole aching heart that the money would matter more in the end. He was wrong about that, at least for a while. But he did not know he was wrong yet. His son Mason was 14 years old, and 14 is an age where a boy stops forgiving quietly and starts demanding answers loudly. On the night of his 14th birthday, Mason sat at the kitchen table with a single slice of grocery store cake, no candles because nobody had remembered to buy any, and he stared at the clock until it read 11:40. His father was not coming, again. When Daniel finally walked through the door at midnight, smelling of motor oil and exhaustion, Mason stood up so fast his chair clattered backward onto the floor. "You missed it," Mason said, and his voice was not loud, which somehow made it worse. "You missed all of them. Every single year. Do you know what the guys at school say about you? They say you're a failure, and you know what? I used to defend you, not anymore." He walked past his father without looking at him, and slammed his bedroom door so hard, a picture frame in the hallway cracked down the middle. It was a photo of Daniel's late wife, Claire, holding baby Mason in a hospital blanket, and the crack ran directly through her smiling face, as if even the house itself were grieving something it could not name. This was not the first birthday Mason had spent alone, and it would help to understand the ones that came before it. When Mason turned 8, Daniel had promised to be home by 7 for a small dinner, and instead a construction foreman called at 6 asking him to cover a night shift because another man had walked off the job. Daniel said yes, because saying yes meant an extra $90, and $90 meant new shoes for a boy whose feet had outgrown the old ones 2 sizes over. Mason ate alone that night, too, watched cartoons until he fell asleep on the couch, and never once complained out loud, because at 8 years old he had already learned, quietly and without anyone teaching him directly, that complaining did not bring his father home any faster. By 11, he had stopped setting a second plate. By 13, he had stopped expecting a card. Each year, the disappointment did not grow louder. It grew heavier, settling into the boy like sediment at the bottom of a river, until it finally hardened into something that looked a great deal like contempt. Daniel did not chase him. He stood in that narrow hallway for a long time, looking at the broken glass, and he let the words sink into him like a stone dropped into still water. Failure. He had heard it before, whispered behind his back at the hardware store, muttered by the mothers at school pickup who assumed a man who could not attend a single recital must simply not love his son enough. Nobody in that town knew the truth because Daniel had never told a soul, not even Mason, about the year everything fell apart. The year his own brother-in-law took everything from him and left him holding the wreckage. 5 years earlier, Daniel and his wife's brother, a smooth-talking, quick-smiling man named Victor Hale, had built a small construction and renovation company together from nothing. Reyes and Hale Contracting had been Daniel's dream since he was 19 years old, swinging a hammer for other men's companies and promising himself that one day his name would be on the truck door too. Victor handled the books, the contracts, the client relationships, because Victor was charming in a way Daniel never was, and Daniel trusted him the way you trust family. which is to say completely and without a single backup plan. Claire had been the one who kept Daniel anchored to people, the one who remembered birthdays and thank you notes and the names of neighbors' dogs, the one who could walk into any room and make Daniel seem less like the quiet man in the corner and more like someone worth getting to know. When she died, suddenly and without warning from an illness the doctors described in a language too clinical to comfort anyone, Daniel did not just lose a wife. He lost the only person who had ever made him feel like less of an outsider in his own life. He grieved the way men like him tend to grieve, silently, by working harder, by refusing to let anyone see the wound, by pouring himself so completely into being a good father that he forgot, somewhere along the way, that a 5-year-old boy cannot actually see love that is only ever expressed through absence and effort. Mason was too young then to remember his mother clearly, and that absence, layered on top of his father's growing absence, left a boy who understood love mostly as something other families seemed to have, and his family, somehow, did not. It took Victor 3 years to bleed the company dry. He forged signatures on loan documents, diverted client deposits into a shell account, and quietly built himself a second life in another state while the business he supposedly co-owned collapsed under the weight of debts nobody had told Daniel existed. When the bank called about the second mortgage Daniel never signed, when the lawsuits started arriving from clients whose kitchens and roofs were half finished and fully paid for, Victor had already vanished with his new fiancée and a bank account nobody could trace. Daniel was the name on the paperwork. Daniel was the one left standing in the wreckage. And because Claire had died of a sudden illness only 8 months before all of it unraveled, there was no one left to vouch for who her husband truly was. No one to tell the town that Daniel Reyes had not stolen a single dollar in his life. The lawsuits ate the house they had almost paid off. The unpaid subcontractors spread word through every corner of that small town that Daniel Reyes could not be trusted with a job, a wrench, or a dollar. Nobody hired him. Nobody would even shake his hand at the feed store. He was 31 years old, a widower with a 5-year-old son, blacklisted from the only trade he knew, drowning in debts that legally belonged to a man who had disappeared into thin air, and he had exactly one option left standing in front of him. Work every job that would take a broken man's hands, no matter how humiliating, no matter how many hours, and never ever tell his son the truth, because Mason had already lost his mother, and Daniel refused to let him grow up believing his father was also a criminal, a coward, or both. So Daniel built a different kind of secret life. During the day he was a gas station clerk, humble and invisible. At night he drove a taxi. On weekends he took whatever cash construction jobs a desperate man could still find under the table. Work Victor's smear campaign had not yet reached. Every dollar he earned beyond bare survival went into 2 places. The first was a locked steel box in his closet, where he kept receipts, bank statements, old contracts, anything that might one day prove what Victor Hale had actually done, because somewhere deep down Daniel refused to let this lie be the last word on his life. The second was a savings account he opened under Mason's name the week after the collapse. An account he fed $5, $10, sometimes only $2 at a time, year after year, telling no one, not even the bank teller who processed the same tiny deposit so often she started greeting him by name. He missed the birthdays because those were the exact nights his second and third jobs paid double, the exact nights the taxi company offered holiday bonus rates, the exact nights construction crews needed an extra set of hands to finish a rush job before a client's deadline. He told himself every year that next year would be different, that once the debt was cleared, once Mason's account had enough in it to matter, he would show up for everything, every recital, every birthday, every single ordinary Tuesday. He did not realize that a boy does not measure love in future promises. A boy measures it in the empty chair at the table, in the candles nobody lit, in the door that does not open until midnight. The morning after Mason called him a failure, Daniel got up before dawn as he always did, made his son's lunch as he always did, and left it on the counter with a small handwritten note, as he always did, a habit Mason had stopped reading months ago. He went to the gas station, then to a 12-hour construction shift, then straight into an overnight taxi rotation, running on coffee and stubbornness. Somewhere around 2 a.m, sitting outside a bar waiting for a fare that never came, Daniel finally allowed himself to cry quietly, the way men who have forgotten how do it, all shoulders and no sound. Back at home, curiosity had gotten the better of Mason. He had never once gone through his father's things, not out of respect exactly, But because a part of him did not want to know what he might find, but that night, angrier than he had ever been, he wanted answers, even ugly ones. He wanted proof of whatever his father was hiding, whatever secret made him choose strangers' errands over his own son's birthday candles. He found the locked steel box shoved behind winter coats in the closet, and after 20 frustrating minutes with a bent paperclip he had watched in an online video, the lock finally gave. Inside, Mason expected gambling slips, empty liquor bottles, maybe love letters to some woman he had never met, some excuse that would let him keep hating his father with a clean conscience. Instead, he found 5 years of bank statements for an account in his own name. Statements showing deposits that never once exceeded $20, but that had accumulated, slowly, stubbornly, into a total that made his hands shake when he did the math. He found old contracts stamped Reyes and Hale Contracting, forged loan documents with a signature that was clearly not his father's handwriting, newspaper clippings about a fraud investigation that named Victor Hale but somehow never cleared Daniel Reyes's name in print. And he found, folded at the very bottom, a birthday card in his father's rough handwriting, dated from that very afternoon, that his father must have written and never found the courage or the right moment to give him. The card read simply, "Mason, I know you think I forgot you. I have never forgotten a single birthday in my life. Every one of them lives in me like a wound I chose to carry so you would not have to. One day I will explain everything, and I hope when that day comes you will understand that missing the party was never the same as missing you. I love you more than I have ever known how to say out loud. Dad." Mason sat on the floor of that closet until sunrise, the papers spread around him like the pieces of a puzzle he had spent his whole life refusing to assemble. For the first time, the anger in his chest had somewhere else to go. It was no longer aimed at his father. It was aimed at a name he had never heard before that night. Victor Hale, his own uncle by marriage, the man who had smiled at Mason's christening, who had once given him a toy truck for his 3rd birthday, the very same year he was already stealing from the company that bore his name alongside Daniel's. When Daniel finally dragged himself home near dawn, he found his son sitting at the kitchen table, the steel box open in front of him, the birthday card held carefully in both hands like something sacred. Daniel froze in the doorway, every instinct telling him to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the discovery. But Mason looked up first, and his eyes were red, and his voice when it came was not accusing anymore. It was simply broken open. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked. "Why did you let me call you a failure for 5 years when the truth is you were the only person in this whole town who never once gave up on me?" Daniel sat down across from his son and finally, after 5 years of silence, told him everything. He told him about Victor's smile and Victor's lies. He told him about the mortgage he never signed and the clients who spat at his feet outside the hardware store. He told him about the gas station and the taxi and the construction sites, and why every single dollar beyond survival had gone into that account with Mason's name on it, and why the birthdays had been the cheapest thing he owned to sacrifice. Because presents could be rebuilt someday, but the boy's future could not be rebuilt if the money simply was not there when it mattered most. Mason listened without interrupting, and when his father finished, the boy did something Daniel had not expected. He asked to see everything in that box again, this time slowly, page by page. Together, father and son spent the following weeks doing what Daniel had never had the resources, the time, or, honestly, the courage to attempt alone, because for 5 years, survival had left no room for anything as slow and uncertain as chasing a man who had already proven he knew how to disappear. Mason, who had grown up quietly fascinated with computers while his father worked 3 jobs, began digging through old public records online, following the thin trail of a bank account name Victor had once used on a canceled utility bill Daniel had kept purely by accident. It took 11 days of late nights, energy drinks, and stubborn refusal to give up. But Mason found him. Victor Hale was living 2 states away under a slightly altered version of his own name, running a new renovation company, charming a new town, apparently still practicing the same confident smile that had once fooled an entire family. Daniel's first instinct was rage, pure and old, and finally given a direction to travel. His second instinct, the one that actually mattered, was patience. A furious accusation with no proof would simply let Victor smile his way out of another town, the way he clearly had before. So instead, Daniel and Mason built a case, quietly and carefully, the way Daniel had once dreamed of building houses. They gathered the forged signatures and compared them against old company documents that showed Daniel's real signature side by side. They tracked down two of the original defrauded clients who were stunned to learn the real story after 5 years of believing Daniel was the thief, and both agreed, finally, to give sworn statements. They found the original bank records showing the shell account transfers, records a persistent young detective at the local police department had actually kept on file the whole time, simply waiting for someone to walk through the door with enough evidence to justify reopening a case everyone had assumed was closed forever. The night before they drove to the district attorney's office together, Mason found his father sitting on the porch steps staring at nothing in particular. He sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Then Mason spoke first. "I used to think you were the failure," he said quietly. "I think I just didn't understand what it costs a person to keep showing up for someone even when nobody claps for it." Daniel's throat tightened, and he put an arm around his son's shoulders, the way he used to when Mason was small enough to fall asleep against his side in the truck. "You don't have to forgive me for the birthdays," Daniel said. "I forgive myself for them every single day, and some days I still fail at that too. I just need you to know I never once stopped choosing you. I only ever looked like I wasn't." The detective who had once investigated the original fraud, a soft-spoken woman named Detective Ibarra, who had never fully believed the case against Daniel added up in the first place, met with them on a rainy Tuesday afternoon and spread every document across her desk like a puzzle she had been waiting 5 years to finish. She explained that the original investigation had stalled not because Daniel was guilty, but because Victor had vanished across state lines before local jurisdiction could act, and without a fresh trail, the file had simply gone cold, the way so many cases do when the guilty party is fast enough and the system is stretched too thin to chase him. What Mason had found online, the utility bill, the slightly altered name, the new company registered barely 200 miles from where the fraud had begun, gave her exactly the thread she needed to reopen a file she had never wanted to close in the first place. She looked at Mason for a long moment and told him, plainly, that most 14-year-olds would not have had the patience to sit through 11 nights of dead-end searches, and that whatever he ended up doing with his life, he clearly had the instincts for it. The case against Victor Hale moved faster than either of them expected once real evidence entered a system that had been waiting patiently in a drawer for years.
Victor was arrested at his new renovation office in front of his new clients.
The same charming smile freezing on his face the moment he saw Daniel standing quietly by the door, not gloating, not shouting, simply present, the way he had learned, finally. That presence was worth more than any speech he could have delivered. At the arraignment weeks later, Victor tried once briefly to catch Daniel's eye and offer the same easy smile that had once talked banks into loans and clients into deposits, as though 5 years and a mountain of evidence could be dissolved with a familiar grin. Daniel did not look away, and he did not smile back either. He simply said quietly enough that only Victor and the bailiff could hear, "You took 5 birthdays from my son and never once thought about him at all. I hope somewhere in that cell you finally do." Victor's smile did not survive the sentence. Victor pleaded guilty rather than face a trial that Mason's research had made nearly unwinnable, and the court ordered restitution that, while it could never fully repay 5 years of a boy's stolen birthdays, at least cleared Daniel's name in the same public records that had once destroyed it, and returned enough of the stolen funds to finally settle the debts that had chained Daniel to 3 jobs for half a decade. The town that had once whispered failure behind Daniel's back did something towns rarely do gracefully. It got quiet, and then slowly, it got kind. The same hardware store clerk who used to avoid eye contact now shook Daniel's hand and told him he was sorry, that he should have asked questions instead of assuming the worst of a grieving widower doing his best. Daniel did not need the apology by then, but he accepted it anyway, because bitterness had never been the point of any of this. The point had only ever been his son. On Mason's 15th birthday, 7 months after Victor's arrest, Daniel walked through the door at 6 in the evening instead of midnight, still in his work clothes but early for the first time in 6 years, carrying a cake with 15 candles he had bought himself that afternoon on his lunch break. Mason was waiting at the table, not with resentment this time, but with a grin he had not worn at a birthday in longer than either of them could remember. Daniel set the cake down, lit every single candle with hands that trembled slightly, And before Mason could blow them out, Daniel said something he had never managed to say out loud in 5 years of silence. "I'm sorry it took me this long to be the man standing in this room instead of the man working somewhere else to protect it. Happy birthday, son. I see you now, and I promise you I am never going to stop." Mason blew out the candles, and for once neither of them needed to make a wish, because the thing they had both been quietly hoping for was already sitting right there at the table between them. Word spread through the town the way it always does in small places, faster than any newspaper could print it. And within a month, people who had crossed the street to avoid Daniel were the same people knocking on his door asking if he had time to look at a leaking roof or a rotting porch step. Daniel was polite to all of them, but he was no longer desperate for their approval the way he might have been 5 years earlier. Mason noticed that too, the way his father's shoulders sat differently now. Less like a man bracing for another blow, and more like a man who had finally set down something heavy he had been carrying so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. One afternoon, the same neighbor who used to whisper about Daniel over the fence brought over a casserole, unprompted, and stood awkwardly on the porch trying to find the right words. And Mason watched his father accept the dish with a graciousness that felt, to a 15-year-old finally paying attention, like the truest kind of strength there was. In the months that followed, Daniel used part of the restitution money, along with the modest savings account that had grown quietly for 5 long years, to open a small independent contracting business of his own. A single truck at first with his own name freshly painted on the door. No partners this time, no shortcuts, nothing hidden. Mason spent his weekends in the passenger seat learning how to read a blueprint and swing a hammer properly. Not because his father needed the help, but because for the first time in his life he wanted to be near him. The town started calling that little company reliable, then trusted, then within 2 years the best in the county. And Daniel Reyes, the man they had once written off as a failure who could not even show up for his own son's birthday, became, slowly and without any need for revenge beyond the truth finally being told, the man everyone in that town wanted working on their homes. A year after that 15th birthday, Daniel stood in the driveway watching his son practice parallel parking the company truck badly, laughing in a way Mason had rarely heard growing up, a full, easy laugh that came from a chest no longer weighed down by 9 years of unspoken guilt. Mason had started talking about studying criminal justice one day, telling anyone who would listen that he wanted to be the kind of person who reopens the files everyone else gave up on. And Daniel never once told him that dream was impractical, because he, of all people, understood exactly how much one patient person willing to keep looking could change the entire shape of a family's future. On slow evenings, they still ate at the same kitchen table where the confrontation once happened, the same table where a crooked steel box had once spilled 5 years of secrets across the wood, except now there were 2 plates set every single night, without fail, and neither of them had to wonder anymore whether the other one was coming home. If there is one thing this story asks you to carry with you, it is this: do not mistake a person's silence for absence, and do not mistake their sacrifice for indifference. Some of the people who seem to be missing from our lives are actually fighting battles for us that we will never see, in rooms we will never enter, at hours we will never witness, simply so that one day we can stand in a kitchen with 15 candles burning and finally understand that we were loved the entire time. Even during the years it looked exactly like the opposite. Daniel Reyes missed 9 birthdays to keep a promise his son did not even know existed. And when the truth finally came out, it did not just clear his name. It gave a father and a son back to each other at exactly the moment both of them had almost stopped believing that was still possible. If this story touched you, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that showing up looks different for everyone, and that love, real love, does not always announce itself with candles and cake. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in a locked steel box, in a $5 deposit, in a birthday card that took 5 years to finally be read. Thank you for watching until the very end, and I will see you in the next story.